Hearing God's voice. That is our new series that we started last week. And I want to pick up right where I left off. I think it's also not by accident that Sarah happened to come and mention that I talked about positioning ourselves in the presence of God. And then our songs went right along with that. The fragrance of your presence. I could get used to that. I could get used to this. So I want to pick up, like I said, where I was last week. And last week, it was about hearing God's voice. And it was called Fish Tank Voice. And I talked about how there's three things that we must always consider when it comes to hearing God's voice. Just to catch you up real quick. The first thing was the delivery. How is God saying what He is speaking to you? That might say something about the message He is trying to convey. Oftentimes we don't consider how is God saying it. So many people will hear what God tells them and then they'll go and run and tell everybody else when in last week's message, He whispered to Elijah. And sometimes if we just consider the delivery, that might tell us a little bit about who God is talking to and who God's wanting to speak to. The next thing was the message. Oftentimes when we look at the message that God is trying to send us, that He is speaking to us, when we're hearing God speak to us, we often consider the explicit, literal words that God is saying, when oftentimes He wants us to consider the implicit meaning that is being conveyed behind the literal words that He is saying. And then the third thing was the reception. Something we must consider is our reception. Do we have good reception? And I talked about bad reception, and I talked about drop phone calls and all kinds of things like that. But the gist was, I said, apart from God's presence, it can be difficult to hear God's voice. And we talked about positioning ourselves in God's presence. So now you're caught up. But when I said something last week, when I said apart from God's presence, it can be difficult to hear God's voice, many of us probably thought to ourselves, oh, he's referring to being apart from God's presence. He must be referring to a sinful lifestyle, or suggesting that because I'm not in, or because someone is not in God's presence, that God is absent. And I want to tell you today, if that's what you thought to yourself, that's not necessarily what I was saying. Because if we limit being apart from God's presence to God being absent, then we can dismiss it. For a lot of us, we can dismiss that. If we limit it to a sinful lifestyle, because we can just dismiss it because, oh, I go to church. Oh, I'm a pretty nice person. I hold the door for people. I say nice things. I'm not a sinful person. I'm not doing horrible things all the time. I don't do bad stuff. I don't do necessarily what he does or she does, and we can so easily start to compare in our mind and dismiss what I was talking about when I talked about being in God's presence. So today I want to take a further look at our story in terms of positioning. Just like Sarah started us off, we're going to continue today talking about positioning, because positioning is key when it comes to hearing God's voice. So let's look again at verses 1 and 2 of our story today. And it said, the boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under Eli. In those days, the word of the Lord was rare. There were not many visions. In verse 2, one night Eli, whose eyes were becoming so weak that he could barely see, he was lying down in his usual place. Here's point number 1 today, if you're taking notes. Just 2 points today that I'm going to go off of. You can be on assignment, but out of alignment. That's point number 1. You can be on assignment, but out of alignment. Let me give you some context to what's going on here in verse 1. If you've read this before, First Samuel, if you've read 1 Samuel before, in chapter 2, what is going on is Eli, he's a priest during this time. He's a pastor, teacher, speaker, whatever you want to call him. Regardless, he was a priest. And just like priests today, there's a standard to being a priest. Even probably more so during this time, there was a standard to living, an upright life, a righteous life, as you could, in this time. So Eli was a priest, and he had 2 sons, And they were living reckless lives. They were just not caring about anything. And they were troublemakers. And what they would do is they would take the very best sacrifices that were brought to the temple that were supposed to be for God, kept for God, brought to God. They would take them and keep them for themselves. And I know you're like, well, who cares? But during that time, that was a big deal. Stealing someone's sacrifice, that was a big deal. And not only that, they were sleeping around with the temple servant girls. And if you were a prophet, or if you were going to be a prophet during this time, nothing could come between you and God. So Eli, what he does in response to his son's behavior is he rebukes them, but he does not remove them. And that is the moment where God draws the line. And he stops speaking to Eli. And that's why it says here, the word of the Lord was rare and there were not many visions. It says that Eli's eyes had become weak and he could barely see. Yes, this is talking about his physical eyesight. But something to consider today as we talk about hearing God's voice, it is also talking about spiritual sight. It's saying that Eli has lost, or his eyes have become weak. It's talking about his spiritual eyes. He's lost vision. He's lost his direction. He's lost his sense of purpose. Maybe you feel like that today. Maybe you relate to Eli in this story today. And then it says, at the end of verse 2, he was lying down in his usual place. Look at that phrase, usual place. If that's you today, if you relate to Eli, maybe you'll relate even more to this. What is the usual place? Well, Eli's up to the same old, same old. He's going through the motions, same old routine. Go to church, sing a couple songs, hear a word, give some money, go to lunch. It's the usual place. He's gotten very accustomed to his routine. And you see, he's a priest, so he's a good guy. He isn't doing anything bad necessarily. But I need you to recognize something today. He's on assignment. Many of us would say he's on assignment, but he's out of alignment. He's on you would say, man, he's from the outside looking in, man, he's a preacher, he's a priest, he's a good guy, he's not doing anybody any harm, he's not doing anything bad. But here he is. His eyes have become weak. He's lost his sense of purpose, his sense of direction. He's lost vision for his life. And he's lying down in his usual place. So you can be on assignment but out of alignment. And things can just become going through the motions. They can just become routine. And you see, this can affect hearing God's voice. Now look at contrast to that. Maybe you're feeling that way today, so keep that in mind. But now let's look at the contrast to that, and let's look at verse 3. And it says, the lamp of God had not yet gone out. It's simply telling us what time it is. They would, in the temple, they would keep the lamp burning through the night, and then, so it's still burning. It would burn out towards the morning, so it's still burning, so it's trying to tell us that this is somewhere close to dawn. It's just telling us the time of day. And it says, Samuel was lying down in the house of the Lord where the ark of God was. So you got Eli from the outside looking in. He's a preacher, he's a priest, he's got it. He's on assignment. He is working for the Lord. He's a good guy. But it's become the same old, same old. He's lost his vision. He's lost his sense of purpose. He's lost his direction. He's on assignment, but he's out of alignment. And then look at the contrast to that. You have Samuel, who at this point is Eli's protege. He is a 12-year-old boy. And he has went to bed near the ark. If you're unfamiliar with the Ark of the Covenant in the Old Testament was literally the place where God's presence was housed. See, we live in the New Testament era where we have Jesus' presence, the Holy Spirit living inside of us, living and breathing. But before Jesus, God's presence would rest in the Ark of the Covenant. And we're seeing a young Samuel, a 12-year-old boy, who is saying today, look at the contrast to Eli, He is saying, I'm going to fight for proximity to God's presence. I'm going to align myself with God. I'm going to try to get as close as I possibly can to His presence. See, it's not just about doing the bare minimum. It's not just going through the motions. It's not, oh, I'm hoping God will speak to me today. It's saying, I want to be about whatever God's about. I want to be wherever God is. I want to be doing what God is doing. Wherever God is, I want to be where God is. I want to fight for proximity to His presence. Do you see the difference here? You can be on assignment but out of alignment. And many of you thought I was talking about a sinful lifestyle. And you can easily dismiss yourself from this conversation. Because you're like, well, I'm not living a sinful life, so I guess I'm in God's presence, so He should be speaking to me. And you dismissed that from last week, but it still stands. You don't have to be living a sinful lifestyle. You can be a priest, a preacher, a teacher, whatever you want to be. You can lose your sense of purpose, your sense of direction. You can be laying down in your usual place, going through your same old routine, and you can be on assignment, but out of alignment with where God is taking you. So I'm not even talking about sin. I'm talking about putting yourself, maybe you've put yourself in environments that are misaligned with God. Maybe you're hanging out with people that are misaligned with God. Maybe you're in places that are misaligned with God. And you're saying to yourself, you're spending so much time and you're asking yourself this question, why is it that I can't hear God's voice? But it's not because you're living a sinful lifestyle. It's not because you're a bad person. It may just be that you're misaligned, that you're in your usual place, that you haven't mixed things up in a while. Does anybody remember, and maybe y'all still have these, teachers, you could speak up, the smart boards in school? You still got them? Smart board. Okay, still got the smart boards. I remember when the smart boards came onto the scene. And they're having to put them in everybody's classroom. If you're unfamiliar with what a smart board's like projector on the wall, but there's this board that they created that you can magically use this app within the computer and then write all over it. You no longer have to use the expo markers, and you can use this magic smart board. Yeah, have anybody ever noticed that anything technology-wise, they just put smart in front of it because they can't explain it? It's like smartphone, smart device, smart board. They just say smart in front of everything. It gets to me. But anyways, the smart boards in school. So there's an evolution to this. I'm assuming that once upon a time there were chalkboards. Yeah. Then you go, once upon a time. Thank you. So we've got a witness in here today. And then you go to white expo marker boards somewhere along the line. And then anybody remember the overheads? You remember the overheads? Those were fun. I was always really impressed by the teachers who could sit the overheads here, and they're on this side. So it's like reverse to them, and they're putting the thing on, and they're doing it so fast. I'm like, this is impressive. So then from the overhead, you go to somewhere along the lines, you got the smart board now. But does anybody remember what would happen when the pen, I always remember this, the pen becomes uncalibrated? You remember this? Everybody remembers this. For everybody who's in the chalkboard time, let me explain. I'm just kidding. That was a joke. Anyways, the pen would become uncalibrated, so then the teacher, they would get so frustrated. It's either the bulb goes out in the projector or the pen becomes uncalibrated, and it stops everything. And I'm like, you've got some whiteboard over here. Just pick up where you left off on the ancient whiteboard. Anyways, so then they grab the pen, and then they have to go through all these steps, and I'm sure you teachers are still having to do this, and you're very familiar, and it's frustrating you as I talk about it. But you have to go to the calibration thing, and what it does is, if you've ever calibrated something with technology, it pops up like these 4 lines. There's a line here, line here, line here, line here. You have to touch the pen precisely right in the middle, and if it doesn't take, it can be uncalibrated. But what always made me laugh is it makes the teacher chase the thing. And if you have a short teacher, it's funny to watch. So, because I was tall, so it was always funny to me. But they would take them over here, and then it would take them up there, and they're like, and then they would take them over here, and then over there, and then the last one is the center. And you got to get it right, or it'll be uncalibrated. What happens when it's uncalibrated, for those of you unfamiliar? So they'll be writing over here, and it'll be like over here. But maybe today, you just need to be recalibrated. Maybe today you need to just chase the dots around with your little pen and calibrate your life, become aligned with God, with the things of God, with the environments of God, with the people of God, with the places of God. You need to not only be on assignment, but be in alignment. Because here's the thing. You can be on assignment and out of alignment, and you can go that way a really long time, because being on assignment can fool you. Trust me, where I stand, I can tell you, like, I've been there. You can be on assignment. You can be leading a church. You can be up here preaching every Sunday. You can be all into the worship. You can be on assignment. To most people looking on the outside, man, this guy is an upstanding guy or girl or whatever the case may be. This person is a good person. And you can fool yourself into thinking, I'm on assignment. I'm doing the Lord's work, serving in the Lord's house. I'm a good person. But the whole time, you can totally just be going through the motions in your usual place. Just like Eli. I want to be like Samuel, the 12-year-old boy who he's not yet known the Lord, but he's fighting for proximity to God's presence. He's lying near the Ark of the Covenant. I want to be close to God. I want to be near the things of God. I want to be in God's presence. Wherever God is, I want to be where God is. Wherever God is about, I want to be what God's about. I want to fight for proximity to His presence. Let's continue today in our story in verse 4 and 5. And it says, Then the Lord called Samuel. Samuel answered, Here I am. Verse 5 says this, And he ran out to Eli and said, Here I am, you called me. But Eli said, I did not call you, go back and lie down. So he went and laid down. So I've talked about positioning. And I talked about positioning last week, so I've kind of exhausted positioning when it comes to hearing God's voice. And as important as positioning is, there's something else I want to talk about today. I want to talk about posture. Because positioning is huge, it's key, it's important. But the next step, the next level, if you will, is your posture. When it comes to hearing God's voice, so many of us can do exactly what Samuel does here. Verse 4, it says, he hears God's voice, Here I am. And then he runs to Eli. So many of us can get this same way. Here I am, God. Use me. Speak to me. I'm available. I'm ready. And we get so excited. And then right when God begins to speak to us, we run back to what's comfortable. We run back to what's convenient. We run back to what's familiar. And see, I don't know, maybe it's fear of the unknown. Maybe it's we are insecure and we think we're not enough. Like, I'm not worthy to hear God's voice. Or maybe it's we're afraid of the cost, what it might cost, what He asks of us, what He commands of us, what He speaks to us. We're afraid of the cost, the sacrifices we may have to make to execute what it is He's asking. Or maybe, and I think this is the huge one, maybe it's just we're impatient. See, Samuel goes through this routine 3 times. He says, Here I am, and then he runs to Eli. Here I am, and he runs to Eli. Here I am, and then he runs to Eli. And Eli realizes that God is trying to speak to Samuel. And that's where we pick it up in verse 9. Let's look at it. So Eli told Samuel, Go and lie down. If he calls you, say, Speak, Lord, your servant is listening. So Samuel went and laid down in his place. We talked about positioning. We're talking about posture now. Look at the contrast in Samuel's posture between verses 4 and 5 to verse 9. Samuel, remember, I just said he's fighting for proximity to God's presence. He's eager to hear the voice of God. Maybe you're that way today. Levi, you have no idea how bad I really want to hear God's voice. So I'm in tune to what you're saying because I really could use an answer in my life. God, I need you to speak to me. Samuel's that way. He's eager to be in the presence of God. He's eager to hear God's voice. Yet, each time God speaks, he runs. He runs. 3 times he runs to Eli. Immediately, he runs to Eli. Here I am, runs. I believe so many of us, just like Samuel, we want to hear God's voice. We really do. We're eager to hear God's voice. We've positioned ourselves in the presence, but we often grow so antsy, so impatient, that we take off before giving God a chance to speak. And Samuel does this 3 times until Eli's like, hey, that's God. You may want to hang around and find out what he's got to say. Then it says he went and lay down in his place. I want to show you what this would look like. Let me grab a chair for this. I want to show you what this would be like. So, posture, I can show you kind of what this posture thing would look like. You have Samuel who's eager to hear God's voice. Super eager to hear God's voice. It's as if, in the first 3 times, here I am, here I am, here I am. It's as if he's postured like this, edge of his seat, knee bouncing. And he's like, God, here I am, speak to me. I just want to hear from you. God, I'm ready, speak. And this is his posture the whole time. Like, God, speak, I'm eager. But then something happens. First 3 times he runs, he's immediately running. And then Eli gives him this advice. He says, hey, say, speak, your servant is listening. When he tells him that it's God's voice, watch how his posture changes. It says that he went and lay down in his place. I don't know about you, but that seems like a far distant relation to running. Laying down seems distant to running. So it's as if he was like this. God, speak. And then he found out that this is God speaking to him. Oh. He's relaxed. He's kicked his feet back. He's positioned to stay a while. God, speak. God, I want to hear your voice. He's postured in a different way. He's making himself at home. His entire posture has changed. Have you ever been in a conversation with someone, and I have done this so many times, and I feel bad about it, but maybe you're there too. Have you ever been in a conversation with someone? They're in a chair. Pretend my person is in that chair that no one's in. They're in a chair, and then here's a chair here, and they're wanting to talk to you. And you're behind the chair, and like they're talking, and they're really trying to have a conversation. You're like, yeah, that's good. Yeah. And they're like, sit down, stay a while. And you're like, I really shouldn't. I have, nothing. And then you're like, okay, I will. And you're like sitting there like this, and you're like, just get to the point. Like, stop talking. You're annoying me. And your entire posture is like, get this thing over with. Get to the point. I don't want to hear you talk anymore. I've got things to do, better things to do, places to be, people to see. And this is your posture. Do you think that those people can't tell that you'd rather be anywhere else in the world at that moment? They can. I believe so many of us have started positioning ourselves, catch this, I believe so many of us have started positioning ourselves in the presence of God, just like Samuel. We're eager to hear God's voice. We heard last week's message. We're like, let's go position myself in the presence. I got that. I can get in God's word, reading a verse a day. It's so good. God, you're good. Jesus, I love you. And you're praying and you're like doing the whole thing 5 days a week. I'm in your presence, God. But the whole time, you've positioned yourself in the presence, but you're so eager, you've become just like Samuel. Oh, Jesus, I love you, I love you, I love you. Oh, Jesus, and you're reading John 3:16. Oh, I love it, so good. Come on, Jesus, speak, speak, speak. And you're right there on the edge of your seat the whole time. You're postured yourself in a way that you're like, I heard this message that said if I position myself in your presence, that you'll speak to me. So I now have positioned myself in your presence, and I'm just eager to hear what you have to say. So speak, speak, speak. And the whole time, your posture is telling God something that goes beyond your positioning. You have postured yourself in a way that says, God, get to the point. Hurry up. Nobody's got all day. I love you, Jesus, but I'm really needing an answer, so let's just get this thing over with. And we all kind of get like that sometimes, right? Let me tell you something, church. Your position, I said when I began, I said that it's hard to hear God's voice apart from God's presence. Everybody's got that. Now listen, your position might determine what you hear. If you have bad reception, it's going to sound like a fish tank voice because God's at a distance and you've not positioned yourself in His presence. And it might be hard to hear what He's saying. And your position might determine what you hear. But listen, church, your posture can determine what He might say. Because just like that person you've had a conversation with, they're like, sit down and stay a while, and you're on the edge of your seat, bouncing your knee, like, get this thing over with. They notice your posture. And all of a sudden, the conversation changes. Nobody wants to go deep and vulnerable with someone who just wants to get it over with. Your posture can determine what He might say. Notice that it's not until Samuel's posture changes that God finishes what he says. So he goes back, he lays down in his place. And then he says, speak, your servant is listening. And then God tells him, what I'm about to tell you is going to make everyone's ears tingle. It's not till his posture changes. See, the first 3 times, all God gets out is Samuel. Samuel. It's just, there's nothing there. And maybe you're feeling that way with your relationship with God. Like, Levi, I position myself in His presence, and that's great, you told me to do that, but now I'm not really getting any substance here. Like, yeah, we got a relationship, everything's cool, but all I'm getting is Samuel, Samuel, and it's not going anywhere. Check your posture. Look, and I can prove this to you. I don't want to just say this and it be empty words. I want to prove it to you. It doesn't just happen here. Look at this. Exodus chapter 3, a similar encounter where God speaks to Moses. Exodus 3, it's on the screen. In verse 4, it says, when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush. Look what he says. It's almost like he says, Samuel, Samuel. He says, Moses, Moses. And then look what Moses says. Here I am. Oh, Moses. You can learn a lesson from Samuel. Your posture has to change. Your posture, they're saying the same things. This is the same conversation, literally. Watch what happens. Verse 5. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. God says, take off your sandals. And then verse 6, I love this. Then he said, I am the God of your father. And then it continues on. It says, then he said. Then he said. What happens in verse 5? He says, don't come any closer. Take off your sandals. What is God saying here? See, many people believe, and this is true, many people believe that God tells them to take off his sandals because it's a sign of reverence, it's respect, etc., etc., etc. That's all true. He's God. This is holy ground. He's worthy. Let's take off our sandals. That is all true. But there's actually another significance to this that a lot of people miss. The reason that he tells him to take off his shoes, see, in ancient cultures, you would take off your shoes when you would enter someone's home. When you would enter someone's home. Church, look at what's happening. Moses and Samuel are changing their postures to hear the voice of God. It says, take off your sandals. Instead of, here I am, and then run. God says, don't. So he must have started running. Whoa. You got to change your posture. All right, takes off his shoes. I'm going to take off my shoes. I'm going to kick back my feet. I'm going to get relaxed. I'm going to stay a while. I'm going to make myself at home. Speak, for your servant is listening. The posture changes everything, church. The posture changes everything. Because then it says, then he said. It wasn't until after they changed their posture that God continued to speak. You're so frustrated right now because you position yourself in the presence. You're near the presence of God. You want to be about the things of God. You've got this positioning down. Maybe you're not there yet. Maybe the positioning part of this was for you today and you've been like Eli and you're in the usual place. You need to position yourself in environments with people and places where God is aligned. And you don't need to just be on assignment. You need to be in alignment. Maybe that was for you. But maybe today you have positioned yourself in the presence and you're like, I'm getting nothing. I keep getting Samuel and Moses. Check your posture. Because listen, church, you can be on assignment and out of alignment, but here's my last point. It's on the screen. You can be in the right place with the wrong posture. You can be in the right place with the wrong posture. Think about it. Anywhere you go, your posture matters. If you go into an interview to get a job and you sit down at the table of your interview, or if you're doing it on FaceTime or Microsoft Teams, or, we're living in a digital age now. If you're sitting there and you're like, and they're talking to you, so why are you interested in this job?
Well, I just need some money.
And that's your posture? You ain't getting the job. I'm going to go ahead and tell you. If you're playing on a sports team and you're going out there to, say you're playing basketball, and you're going out there and you're on the court and this is your posture. If I try to pass you the ball, it's just going to be like, ugh. Your posture matters. If you come into this church and you haven't postured yourself in a way before God to receive what He has for you, it don't matter that you're in a building. What matters is your posture. Is your heart open and ready to receive what God has for you? Have you kicked back? Have you said, I'm going to relax. I'm going to take my shoes off. I'm going to make myself at home. God, speak. Minutes turning into hours. You didn't know I could sing. I'm just kidding. I can't. That's what the song's all about. We're actually going to worship to it once again. The fragrance of your presence is so good, church. I just want more of it. I could get used to this. Let's pray together and receive this today. Your posture matters right now, church. How are you postured before God? You may be positioned in a way. You may have positioned yourself today. You may have drove yourself to church today. But what does your posture look like? Is it the same old, same old? Is it the same church routine? Are you just hungry? You just really want to get to lunch? What are you thinking about right now? Or are you saying, God, I don't care if minutes turn into hours. I could get used to this. I'm not in a rush. I'm not in a hurry. We're going to sing that in response to God because we want to sit and stay a while. We want to make ourselves at home and say, God, speak to us. So if that's you today, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to raise your hand. You don't have to do anything for me. But you need to receive this word. You need to receive this song today. And you need to say, God, my posture's changing. Forgive me, Lord. I want to sit in your presence. I want to make myself at home. I'm going to take my shoes off. I'm going to kick my feet back. I'm going to lay down in this place and receive what you have for me. Let's worship together, church.